Perfect. Got it. All right. That was pretty fun, actually. And the lightsaber class it does appeal, right? I mean, come on. I don't know what demographic you're talking about. So, all right. So that says a lot about me. So, all right. So we're going to start off. We're going to zoom out from, I mean, probably, the best of the best environment that they're creating to a broader set of issues that this raises. And so I'm going to talk about these from the point of view of where I sit at the U.S. Green Building Council and thinking about this from the green building movement writ large. And I think, as a couple of people have indicated today, for me, this issue starts and is exceptionally bound up in the idea of a market failure. I mean, I want to echo one thing that people have said, is that there is kind of a conspiratorial tone in this room. And actually, there is a notion that, what brings us together is a belief that we can use buildings to advance health outcomes. And that people, whoever that is, writ large, may not get it. But we're getting close to some kind of tipping point where they're going to get it, and we're going to scale this, and it's going to really make a difference. And I think that I hope I share that resonance that this is happening. And I want to share that a few of us were probably also at an event that USGBC had back in January that also was on the same topic, a health summit. And I also think that felt conspiratorial. We're like, okay. I need to move beyond that, but so let's talk about the mechanism of transformation, at least as I understand it. And I actually think this is a really important issue for the health community to think about. In a lot of ways, this curve, or one just like it about 2 decades ago, is an idea that launched the green building movement. And so for health professionals who are used to sort of theories of change, how does change happen at the level of a clinician? How does it happen at the level of a public health community? This is how we think in the green building community change happens. We essentially believe that, as an article of faith, pretty much, and I'll go into that in a second, that there exists in the world a distribution of performance. There are some people on the right who are innovators, who are risk takers, bleeding edge, achievers. They're the Googles of our world, right? They're the ones who are pulling this distribution to the right. There are another group of early adopters, basically leaders, and then there's a majority of practice that we don't think all that highly of, and then there's a small minority of people who are scofflaws and lawbreakers who we need to basically codify, and they're doing just more than the little silver handcuffs require. And so the question is, and basically our intention as a movement is to move this distribution, to make interventions into markets that shift this distribution to the right, toward higher achievement, toward better performance, so that more of these middles are in the green, and hopefully we continue to pull and create opportunities for those people on the right. So here's the dirty secret. For the last 20 years, we've never had this curve. We've never known what this was. And when I say it's an article of faith, we believed the world is organized this way. Is it a long-tail distribution to the right? God knows. I mean, literally, we don't know. We've never had data on that at the scale of the industry. And so we have put in place a series of interventions against an underlying phenomenon for which we have not characterized it. And I think of that as what we've been able to do is be directionally correct. And for those of you who, again, I'm going to date myself here, the immortal philosopher John Cusack said once, as he launched himself off a ski slope, go that way really fast. And if something gets in your way, turn. And that's more or less the last 2 decades, right? And the other little dirty secret about this is that, no, there's not just one curve. There's a whole bunch of curves, actually an infinite variety of curves. Every performance dimension, every dimension of performance you want from the built environment, whether it's daylight, ventilation, acoustics, thermal, use of recycled materials, whatever your bone to pick with the universe is, there is a distribution of performance out there. And we kind of roll them all up into this one mythical curve. But what we're really doing is saying the world has a lot of different performance dimensions. They're each at a different stage of evolution. They each have a different elasticity to our inputs and that kind of thing. And we're trying to operate them all on the same time. And some of these dimensions don't even exist yet. Okay, that's what we think we do for a living. Yeah. So that's why sometimes when we kind of get our heads spinning around and we think we can do that. I think there's a great audacity in that, to think that we actually can do that. That's how we think change happens. We think we operate on that curve, push and pull, and so forth. one of the challenges we have when it comes to health is another piece of our world that I kind of want to share, the world I live in. I live in a world where we have lots of good intentions, hundreds of good intentions. And we realize those good intentions across a range of scales. So I start with planners, and planners have one vocabulary. I move to architects, and they have a different vocabulary. And then I have charming people like Kate who have another vocabulary. And then I go to operating engineers like Kenny and his colleagues who were here from NIH, and they have a whole separate vocabulary. Not only do they have different vocabularies, they have completely different ways of knowing the world. Like from an academic perspective, they just know the world in different ways, and they have completely different metrics. And so to accommodate them, we create different rating systems for each of these segments that are based on the vernacular of each tribe. So the tribe of planners gets the LEED ND system, LEED for Neighborhood Development, at which we communicate with planners in the way that they are accustomed. Floor area ratio, glazing length, and overhang, and shading, and sidewalk width, and sidewalk to building height ratio, things that planners talk about, and those are the performance dimensions of their realm. We go into architects and engineers, and they have a different set of standards. They understand design guidelines, and they understand, tensile strength and, blow pressure through pipes or however they talk. And then the operating engineers have a completely different set of metrics, which I actually think boil down to one: is my phone ringing and is someone angry? And so each of those has an entirely different, they are all operating off the same intent. They all are trying to create high-performing built environments. They each, at each stage, change the metrics. And then we get to the end and the outcome and we go, hey, did it match? And you go, damn it. It's not that easy. So I'll give you a very concrete example. This is not a concrete example. It's actually a paper example. But the example is air filtration. So let's take the example of air filtration. So we set guidelines for, I'm taking a little artistic license, but this is a true example. So when we talk to architects and engineers, we might say, okay, well, how clean do we want the air to be in here? We're going to specify a filtration rate. And to talk to my engineer, I need to use a MERV number. And for some of you, that MERV number is like, how tiny are the gaps in the filter? So I go out and I say, okay, the specification must be for MERV 13 or greater, and then I can go in my specs and get a bid, and I can go to Home Depot or the equivalent and buy that product and stick it in the building. Done, AEC complete. But the public health person goes, I don't know anything about MERV filtration. What I know is incidence of asthma in that school. Okay, so so that person may use the cool thing that Matt showed us earlier about sort of, inhaler activations per day and the geocoding. And so as a public health professional, I've got great information on my health outcome, which I think is in response to indoor air quality. It has nothing to do with the metric that I specify in a green building world. And of course, I may have another one, which another group of public health folks may have a surveillance system built up about hospitalizations or some other kind of medical outcome, like some other incidence measure that in Atlanta they're recording down there, which has nothing to do with asthma inhalers or my MERV 13 filters. So is our intent the same? Absolutely. Are we trying to provide better indoor air and have better health outcomes? Is our metric completely talking past each other to a degree or very hard to integrate? Yes. Is that the status quo? Absolutely. So just a little truth in advertising. Okay, so what is emerging? What is changing? Why is this so, let me give you my sense of why I think we're at this inflection point and what excites me about this part. So, we have lots of diagrams like this, and I probably stole this from someone in this room. The issue is we understand that the built environment has many impacts on humans. They're ergonomic, they're the choice of the interior fabrics and colors and so forth. There's art and services and so forth. And we know that they lead to, in various degrees of direct or indirect form, to outcomes we can understand, whether it be psychological, physiological, or physical. Those are great. Here's the problem. They're invisible. And so that curve that I showed you earlier, it does work on faith, but it actually has a really hard time working on invisible information. Because our issue is trying to take invisible things and apply basically a good, better, best spectrum so that we can do what we do, which is provide recognition and reward for high performers and basically motivate the market to go in that direction. But if your benefit, if what you deliver is invisible, my apparatus doesn't work. That's a problem. So the cool thing is that we're at this cusp of saying where the way we have always done this always over the last vast 10 years we've been doing this, has been to do things like paper and pencil. And we have used mechanisms like, let me ask the occupants how this is going. I'm going to use a Center for Built Environment survey out of UC Berkeley, and I'm going to, every so often, and maybe every year, I'm going to ask them what they think. I'm going to codify that. I'm going to find out that on some big average, green spaces on certain attributes are better. Okay, that doesn't seem super scalable. And it doesn't, if you're like me, that just doesn't seem like enough. It's not enough to drive what we're talking about. Just asking you and every year having you fill out a Scantron form, it's not enough. What is happening? Our spaces are becoming instrumented. Our spaces are becoming more aware, more responsive. And I'm not going to just sell a straight technology story, but I am going to sell a bit of a technology story, which says our spaces are getting more aware. Those spaces can be translated into data on your experience in those spaces at time scales that increasingly match other flows of energy. So I'm not going to walk you through what all these are, but the idea is basically saying our spaces are aware, our persons are aware. We're increasingly able to automate and quantify ourselves and our spaces. And what emerges? What can you begin to do? Let me give you one example in the realm of mobility. We have incredible guidelines about walkability, design guidelines for sidewalk width and glazing and overhang and all that kind of stuff. And it's all trying to get to the point is, do you walk, right? Do you walk? Like, that's the fundamental thing we're trying to get at, so that we can reward those who have lots of walking versus those who don't. So how do I get it? Do you run? This is a map of Central Park, where the color reflects people running and the density of running. So if I want to know that a road in Central Park is runnable, I don't need to have a design guideline that says the street is this big and the trees are like this. I just go and look where the people are running. And that's a pretty dang good observation about what is runnable. And I can use that information in real time to take behavior and turn it into performance-based standards. Not everything is ready to work like this, but as we move down this road, as we get over this teeter-totter, this kind of information, those design guidelines are going to turn into what Matt described earlier. Testable hypotheses. What are we going to test them against? This kind of stuff. Just to honor a couple of things that are going on in this room, we also want to move beyond just our human experience. We also need to move into the things our buildings are made out of. The same issues apply. And again, I'm going to quickly skate through this and basically say, whether it's a brick or a brick wall or an entire school made of brick, I need information about what that is. What are the chemicals, the hazards, the stuff that's wrapped up in it? So we have a whole generation of basically information intermediaries in our space that are trying to help professionals across that spectrum I showed you navigate these. These could be health product directives, they could be environmental product directives, they could even be our FTC green guides. In any case, what they're doing is helping us bring something invisible, the qualities of materials, to make it visible and make it actionable. And that's what we're doing. So our goal is to do this. Make these invisible things visible moving forward. And so to wrap up, what I think we have is a market failure on a bunch of different levels. We're prepared to address market failures if we can see them. So how can we rationalize our metrics, and how can we take advantage of these emerging opportunities to deploy the framework that we've built up over the last 10 years? So with that, I appreciate your thoughts and looking forward to talking with you.